Post-Aristotle Ancient Philosophy, Part 8, St. Paul. Professor Michael Botwin, Department of Psychology, California State University, Fresno. Paul of Tarsus was a Roman citizen trained in Greek philosophy and Judaic teaching. While on the road to Damascus, he had an apparition where he saw Jesus and converted to Christianity and became one of the early leaders and teachers about Christ's teachings. He borrowed from the Judaic teachings and Platonic philosophy. Let's take a look at how he put things together. From the Judaic teachings, he adopted the idea that there was one God, that God created the universe. In turn, God shapes human destiny, and the God is all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent. And one of the things that Paul sets forth in Christianity is that we have to atone for original sin, going back to the Garden of Eden. From Christian teachings, Paul says that a sacrifice that you make makes reunion with God possible. However, redemption is only through Christ, and he brings forth the idea that individuals can be born again. From Platonic philosophy, Paul says that knowledge, not sensory experience, leads to the truth. He essentially takes Plato's abstract world and turns it into Christian heaven, where again all things are perfect in heaven. In terms of faith, Paul put faith above reason, and you can't logically deduce God. You can only know God through faith. And in Paul's philosophy, only faith can lead to salvation. So unlike our previous philosophers, Paul says the good life is not found in rationality, but rather in faith in God. Paul divided the human into three components. First, the body. Now, in Paul's system, the body is the source of all of our problems. It is because we are doing anything from being thirsty to hungry to, well, let's face it, horny. All of these things, thirst, food, sex, the other basic biological drives, interfere with our knowledge of God. We also have the rational mind. Just because Paul put faith above reason didn't allow him to discount reason totally. And finally, the Spirit, which is God within us. And that is a major component of his theory, that again, this is the Platonic thing. We have God within us. So, get the PowerPoint to move. There we go. And Paul says that humans are conflicted between the bodily urges and God's law. If you are having pleasure of the flesh, you're not thinking about God. You're not being faithful to God. And you're not necessarily obeying God's law. And here is the topper. All pleasure, according to Paul, is sinful. Sexual pleasure, the most sinful. This is where we start getting the idea that sex is bad, sex is sinful. Because if you are thinking about sex, obviously you're not thinking about God. And that's really going to mess up your mind. And a good Christian, according to Paul, should totally abstain from sex. Now the problem with that is if all Christians abstain from sex, there wouldn't be another generation of Christians. And this is where you eventually get laws in Catholicism that you can only have sex if you're married. And the only time you're supposed to have sex is when you intend to reproduce. Other than that, all other pleasures of the flesh, including sex, are sinful. This will become extrapolated down the line to subjugate women. Because why do men think about sex? They look at women. And the mere act of having women around causes men to be distracted from thinking about the important things Paul thought one should think about, like God. So if you've ever wondered why in the Western world we get this idea that sex is a sinful bad thing, blame Paul. He's the guy who started this. And others had talked about it and enunciated it, but Paul says it most strikingly clearly. So, that's a bit about St. Paul. Oops, wrong St. Paul. This St. Paul, not the city. I don't know what they think about sex in St. Paul, Minnesota. Never been there. I imagine there's a few people that like it. But Paul sets the pace. His early theology puts faith above reason and puts pleasures of the flesh as a bad thing that should be minimized in our life. This is why you eventually get things like the chaste nuns and priests and monks and other religious. Because if they're thinking about sex, they're not serving God. So, that's a bit about St. Paul, the philosopher, the religious theologian, not the city. See you next time on the history of psychology. Bye now. This has been a We Have Couches video production. Copyright 2020. Professor Michael Botwin. All rights reserved.